Take a deep breath, fan, because today we're talking about something that started long before the scoreboard lit up. There are moments when you can tell, just by the way the team lines up, that something has shifted. A different energy, a stronger posture, a defense that doesn't wait for the hit, it delivers the hit. In this last battle, we didn't see a group trying to survive the chaos of the division. We saw a team that finally chose to take control, set the pace, and make it clear who runs the field. And before we dive into this full breakdown, help the video out, hit that like button, tell me if you slept well after yesterday's win, and drop a comment sharing what you thought about Mike Tomlin's positioning. The Steelers didn't just beat the Bengals, they dismantled the exact part of Cincinnati's offense that embarrassed them weeks ago. Ja'Marr Chase came into this matchup with the same swagger he always brings, talking, chirping, trying to set a tone before the first whistle, but the Steelers took that personally. 10 targets, 3 catches, just 30 yards, the lowest output he's ever had against Pittsburgh. Joey Porter Jr. didn't just win that matchup physically, he won it psychologically. Every press, every breakup, every moment he forced Chase to stop talking and start reacting was a reminder that this defense isn't running the same system it was early in the season. The shift to more too-high looks wasn't just a schematic tweak, it was a statement. You're not beating us deep anymore, and you're not dictating the terms of the matchup. What made this so fascinating for fans to watch was how it unfolded in real time. When Chase tried to escalate things, Porter didn't blink. When the Bengals tried to get creative, the secondary adjusted before the play even developed. And when frustration boiled over, the spit incident, the meltdown afterward, the denial that didn't survive a single replay angle, it was obvious which team kept its head and which team completely unraveled. The Steelers didn't let the trash talk change the mission. They stayed locked in on the plan they'd emphasized all week: limit the explosives, force Cincinnati to play patient football, and wait for them to crack. And Cincinnati cracked early and often. But it wasn't just Porter Jr. who set the tone. James Pierre played one of the best games of his career, breaking up deep shots, staying square in his technique, and being exactly where he needed to be on every tier of the field. Add in Kyle Duggar's pick 6 and his seamless fit into this defense, and you start to see a secondary that finally looks connected instead of scrambling to compensate for miscommunication. When this defense moves fast and trusts the help behind it, everything changes. How aggressive they can play underneath, how physical they can be at the line, and how much chaos they can create in the middle of the field. You could see the Bengals getting rattled as the game progressed. The missed opportunities, the constant disruption, the sense that nothing they were trying was landing, it all built up until they weren't even focused on football anymore. And that's exactly what a Pittsburgh defense is supposed to do. Not just stop you, but drain your patience, sap your confidence, and make you lose who you are. And while the defense made the statement, the offense had its own storyline unfolding. Aaron Rodgers' hand injury changed the tenor of the game instantly. The confusion, the early exit, the uncertainty on the sideline, it all had you wondering whether something far more serious was going on. But the reports coming afterward, confirming that it's a slight break on the non-throwing hand and not something season-ending, kept the conversation from turning into panic. Still, there's no denying he didn't look like himself. The missed reads, the hesitation, the uncharacteristic choices, things that simply aren't normal for him, now make a lot more sense in hindsight. Then came Mason Rudolph, and whether fans want to admit it or not, he did exactly what a backup quarterback is supposed to do: settle the offense, take the throws that are there, keep drives alive, and allow the rest of the roster to keep the pressure on. 5 conversions on 6 third-down attempts in the second half tells the story. The offense didn't need magic, it needed stability, and that's what he delivered. Kenneth Gainwell might have had his defining moment in a Steelers uniform, stepping up right when Jaylen Warren went down and giving the offense the kind of spark it needed to stay balanced. 105 yards from scrimmage and 2 touchdowns isn't a stat line you luck into. It's the product of decisiveness, vision, and toughness, the very qualities the Steelers rely on when their identity is tested. Darnell Washington was a force of nature, not just a big-bodied tight end, but a mismatched nightmare who punished defenders, created yards on sheer will, and reminded the league that when he gets going downhill, it's a business decision for anyone trying to stop him. From stiff-arming defenders into oblivion to moving piles like a human bulldozer, his presence transformed several drives that might have otherwise stalled. This team didn't just win because players made plays. They won because the entire roster responded to adversity the exact way Cam Hayward demanded weeks ago. They fixed the mistakes, fought through the questionable calls, and refused to let momentum swings define them. That's culture. That's growth. That's the part of a season where identity is forged under pressure. And that's where I'm going to pause this first part, because the second half of this story, the broader implications, the playoff context, the urgency of what comes next, deserves its own space. But before I continue, I want to hear from you. Picking up right where we left off, because this second half of the story is where everything that happened on that field starts to take shape in a bigger, season-defining way. What the Steelers showed wasn't just toughness or execution or even a great game plan. It was something they've lacked for stretches of this season, the ability to take a punch, adjust, and come back swinging harder than before. And that matters more now than ever, because the stretch that's coming is exactly where the season will be decided. The defensive transformation isn't a small storyline, it's the foundation of everything this team hopes to be in December. The shift to more two-high shells has unlocked a version of this secondary that plays fast, confident, and connected. Joey Porter Jr. is playing the best three-game stretch of his young career. James Pierre has gone from depth piece to difference maker. Kyle Duggar looks like he's been in this defense for years, not months. And when those pieces operate with that level of trust, the entire structure becomes harder to attack. Quarterbacks get hesitant, receivers get frustrated, and offensive coordinators start calling plays they don't actually believe in. But beyond the X's and O's, there's something deeper happening. This team finally showed it can respond to adversity without losing itself. Cam Hayward's message weeks ago wasn't just a post-game rant, it was a challenge. A demand for professionalism, resilience, and accountability. Watching them fight through bad calls, injuries, momentum swings, and still control the game from start to finish showed that his words didn't fade the moment the locker room cleared. Young players are absorbing what it means to play Steelers football. Veterans are reinforcing a standard that slipped at times during the first half of the season, and that standard is the only reason teams survive the final stretch of an NFL calendar. And when you zoom out, you see how crucial this win really was. At 6-4, the Steelers remain atop the AFC North, still in control of their playoff path, still holding on to the ability to dictate their own fate. A loss here would have pushed them into a mess of 5-5 teams fighting for the last wild card spot. It would have forced them to chase instead of lead. It would have turned every upcoming game into desperation mode. Instead, they handled their business like a team that understands exactly what's at stake. Now look at the schedule ahead. The Bears game isn't a must-win, but it's the kind of win great teams stack so they don't have to scramble later. Because after that, the Bills and the Ravens. Two teams that believe they're Super Bowl contenders. Two quarterbacks playing at MVP levels. Two games that will demand not just talent, but discipline, maturity, and the kind of fight Pittsburgh showed against Cincinnati. If this defense continues growing in the ways we've seen, faster, meaner, more coordinated, then the Steelers will give themselves a chance against anyone. If the offense can stabilize behind either a healthy Aaron Rodgers or a composed Mason Rudolph, they can complement that defense the way they did in the second half. And if the young core continues learning how to respond to adversity instead of shrinking under it, this team's ceiling rises far beyond what we projected earlier in the year. These next few weeks won't just shape the playoff picture, they'll shape the future of the locker room. Because players like Nick Herbig, Troy Fautanu, Broderick Jones, Zach Frazier, Porter, Wilson, and the rest of the young nucleus are learning in real time what it looks like to fight through pressure, carry a standard, and build something that lasts longer than a single season. Those are the seeds of culture, not the slogans painted on walls, but the lessons absorbed during games like this one. So as the Steelers move forward, they do so with momentum, direction, and the kind of identity they've worked all year to find. And now it becomes a question of consistency. Can they keep tightening the screws defensively? Can they keep the offense stable enough to stay on schedule? Can they continue to respond to adversity instead of folding under it, picking it up right from that moment? Because the story isn't finished yet, not for this team, and not for the fan base that just watched something shift right in front of them. What we're seeing now is the early formation of a version of the Steelers that can go into any stadium, against any quarterback, and refuse to back down from the moment. And that mindset becomes even more important as the pressure rises with every passing week. What stood out most in the aftermath of that win wasn't the score. It wasn't the highlight plays. It wasn't even the individual performances, as impressive as they were. It was the way the Steelers carried themselves once the dust settled. There was no celebrating like a team that caught a break. No relief like a group that survived something. Instead, there was a quiet confidence, almost an expectation that this is the level they're supposed to play at. That's exactly the kind of psychological shift great teams experience before everyone else notices. It's the moment when they stop trying to prove they belong and start acting like they do. And that's where the offense becomes such an important part of this evolution. Because for all the justified excitement around what the defense is doing, the offense doesn't have to be explosive. It has to be functional, steady, and opportunistic. When Mason Rudolph came into the game, he didn't reinvent anything. He didn't try to be a hero. He just executed what was available. Drives were longer. Third downs were managed. The pace slowed down. And for the first time in a while, the defense didn't have to carry chaos on its shoulders while constantly running back onto the field. If the Steelers can pair even a middle-of-the-pack offense with the version of the defense we just saw, physical, disciplined, adaptable, and relentless, they can steal games against teams that think they're better on paper. That is how playoff teams are built, not always by overwhelming talent, but by execution and identity. And that identity is finally becoming visible. Players like Darnell Washington, Kenneth Gainwell, Roman Wilson, and Pat Freiermuth are showing that the Steelers have more than enough pieces to move the ball in Arthur Smith's system. They don't need 40-point performances. They need sustained drives, protection of field position, and the ability to keep the defense fresh. When those things are in place, the entire team takes on a different energy. But here's the part that sticks with you. This roster is learning how thin the margin is between victory and collapse. They're seeing what happens when they lose focus, and they're seeing what happens when they respond with composure instead of emotion. These experiences become the mental building blocks that last for years. When young players remember moments like this, they carry those lessons into future seasons, future playoff pushes, future locker rooms that eventually belong to them. That's why culture matters. That's why standards matter. And that's why games like this, where they're pushed, challenged, and still find ways to dominate, carry a weight far beyond the final score. Because now, expectations change. Now, consistency becomes the demand. Now, the question shifts from can the Steelers compete to can the Steelers sustain this? And that is exactly the kind of question you want to be asking in late November. The path forward won't be easy. The Bears are a trap game if they overlook it. The Bills and the Ravens are tests of everything they've built defensively. The margin for error tightens. The stakes rise. But the Steelers control something far more important than their schedule. They control their growth. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, it feels like they're staring upward instead of trying to stop a slide. And now the moment becomes about taking the next step, building on this, reinforcing the habits that led to this win, and proving that this wasn't an outlier, it was a preview, picking up exactly where we left off, because this story isn't slowing down, it's accelerating. And at this point in the season, every detail matters. Every adjustment matters. Every ounce of growth matters. What the Steelers showed against Cincinnati wasn't a lucky break or a one-week surge. It was the first full glimpse of a team finally starting to understand who it can be when the execution matches the preparation. And here's what's becoming clearer with each passing week. This roster is learning how to operate under pressure without becoming ruled by it. Earlier in the season, you could see moments where one mistake snowballed into three more. A missed read turned into a bad drive. A questionable call turned into a defensive lapse. An injury threw off the rhythm of an entire quarter. But against the Bengals, the opposite happened. Mistakes didn't multiply, they stopped. Bad calls didn't shake them, they sharpened them. Adversity didn't send them backward, it forced them forward. The moment Jalen Ramsey got tossed could have sent the defense into panic mode, especially against a division rival with explosive weapons and a quarterback who hasn't been shy about attacking Pittsburgh's weaknesses. Instead, the defense tightened up and played some of its most disciplined snaps of the season. The secondary closed windows faster. The linebackers played downhill without hesitation. The pass rush fought through holds, chips, and missed calls until they finally started landing. That is what a mentally tough team looks like. Not flawless, not perfect, but unfazed. And that mentality is contagious. It spreads through position rooms, through sideline huddles, through meetings during the week. You could see it in the way the offensive line settled after the quarterback change. You could see it in the way Kenneth Gainwell kept attacking lanes even after long, draining drives. You could see it in the way Darnell Washington played like a man who decided he wasn't going to be tackled by a single human being in the stadium. When one player raises their standard, others have to rise with them. And right now, you're seeing that rise across the entire locker room. But perhaps the biggest takeaway, the one that has the most long-term implications, is how deeply this game affects the younger core of the roster. You can't manufacture experience like this. You can't simulate a rivalry game turning chippy, or a star receiver melting down, or officials swallowing whistles, or a quarterback going down mid-game. These moments forge a team's identity in ways practice never can. And when you have rookies and second-year players going through it together, Fautanu, Frazier, Herbig, Wilson, Porter Jr., you're building a foundation that lasts far beyond a single season. This win wasn't just a step forward, It was a message to the locker room. This is how we respond. This is how we adjust. This is how we finish. And if you can do it once, you can do it again. That is how confidence grows. That is how culture sets in. That is how a season that looked shaky in September can suddenly look dangerous in December. Now the challenge becomes consistency. Can they stack performances like this? Can they maintain the defensive discipline? Can the offense stay balanced and efficient while navigating injuries? Can they handle being the hunted instead of the overlooked? These are the questions that define playoff teams. And for the first time in a while, the Steelers look like a group ready to answer them. Because momentum is real, but only if you know how to use it. And right now, Pittsburgh isn't just using it. They're building on it, picking it up right from that exact moment. Because the pulse of this story is still climbing. And what comes next may be even more important than everything that already happened. When a team finds itself in the middle of a season-defining stretch, the real test isn't whether they can dominate once, it's whether they can carry the weight of expectation into the next week, the next challenge, the next moment where everything tightens and nothing comes easy. And that's where this Steelers team now stands. They're standing at the edge of something that can either become a launch point or a lesson, depending entirely on how they handle the weeks ahead. What they showed against Cincinnati, the composure, the physicality, the cohesion, the ability to respond without panicking, is something every playoff caliber team must develop. But developing it once isn't enough. You have to choose it again and again, under pressure, in chaos, on the road, against teams that don't just want to beat you, they want to expose you. This is where the locker room leadership becomes invaluable. Cam Hayward's presence carries weight, not because he's loud, but because he's consistent. TJ Watt's example matters, even when he isn't filling the stat sheet the way he normally does, because he plays every snap like it's the last of the season. Minkah Fitzpatrick's voice matters even when he isn't on the field, because players in the room know he demands excellence from himself first. When young players walk into a locker room filled with that kind of expectation, they either rise or they get left behind. And right now, it's clear that the young core isn't just rising, they're buying in. But the truth is, the hardest part isn't building momentum, it's sustaining discipline. It's easy to play sharp when emotions are high, when the crowd is loud, when the opponent is chirping, when the rivalry fuels every hit. But discipline shows itself when the energy isn't automatically there, when the opponent isn't Cincinnati or Baltimore, when the stadium doesn't carry the same edge, when you're supposed to win. That's why trap games exist, and why teams fall into them every single year. This is where coaching matters. This is where preparation matters. And this is where the Steelers must prove they can execute without relying on emotion. Because the blueprint they followed against the Bengals wasn't built on emotion, it was built on structure, on communication, on trust, on understanding the assignment and executing it with conviction. If they can carry that into the next matchup, the identity we're seeing now won't just be a moment, it will become who they are. And let's be honest, the AFC is wide open in ways nobody predicted. Teams expected to dominate are slipping. Teams expected to rebuild are contending. And teams like Pittsburgh, teams with flaws but with heart, have a lane if they're willing to fight for it. A lane for a playoff spot. A lane for a postseason upset. A lane for momentum that stretches beyond what anyone projected in September. That's what makes this point in the season so compelling. Everything is up for grabs. But the Steelers cannot afford to live off the high of one dominant win. They must build off it. They must reinforce the habits that carried them through adversity. They must polish the details that will matter against Buffalo, Baltimore, and every contender that believes Pittsburgh isn't ready for the lights. That's why the next game, no matter the opponent, becomes the most important game of the season. Not because of the record, not because of the standings, but because consistency defines legitimacy. And legitimacy is what separates the teams that sneak into the playoffs from the teams that make noise once they get there. If you've been riding with this breakdown, keep it going, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tap on the video on screen now, because the story isn't finished, the season isn't settled, and the most important chapters are still ahead. Picking up from that exact point, because this is where the narrative turns from a single game statement into a season-long reckoning. Everything the Steelers just put on tape becomes the foundation for what they must build next, and every opponent watching that film knows it. Once you dominate a rival the way Pittsburgh did, you don't get to show up quietly anymore. You become the team other coaches circle, the team other coordinators study, the team every opponent tests to see whether you're real or just loud. And that's what makes this stretch so defining. The Steelers can no longer hide behind the idea that they're figuring it out. They did figure something out. The defense found its identity, the offense found stability, and the locker room found its composure. Now the question becomes whether they can sustain it when the opponents change, when the environment changes, when the pressure shifts from proving themselves to validating themselves. That shift is subtle, but it separates contenders from pretenders every single year. What's fascinating about this team right now is how clear their formula has become. It isn't complicated. It isn't flashy. It isn't designed to win a shootout with a team built around a Hall of Fame quarterback in his prime. It's built to win games by forcing teams into discomfort, mental, physical, emotional. The Steelers aren't trying to outscore you. They're trying to outlast you. They're trying to out-hustle you, out-hit you, and out-discipline you. They want to turn every quarter into a slow, grinding test of your patience and execution. And if you crack first, like Cincinnati cracked, they take the game from you. That style of football travels. It survives bad weather, bad whistles, hostile crowds, and tough road games. But it also requires something that can't be measured in analytics: absolute buy-in. Every player has to believe in the structure, even when it feels uncomfortable. Every rep has to be taken seriously, even when the opponent isn't a powerhouse. And every moment of adversity has to be viewed as an opportunity rather than a derailment. That's where this team has grown the most. Earlier in the season, you could see cracks. Now you're seeing resolve. And the timing couldn't be better, because the schedule ahead isn't forgiving. Buffalo and Baltimore will test every part of what Pittsburgh is building: the discipline and coverage, the tackling, the communication on the back end, the ability to stop mobile quarterbacks and explosive offenses, the poise when the game starts swinging back and forth. Games like that demand teams to know exactly who they are. They punish hesitation. They punish inconsistency. They punish teams that flash potential but can't sustain identity. But the Steelers are entering that stretch with something they haven't consistently shown this year: momentum with purpose. Not empty excitement, not emotional highs that fade after kickoff, but a real, observable improvement in how they function as a team. From the front seven staying gap sound to the secondary communicating out of new shells, from the offensive line settling into drives to the running backs punishing defenders in space, everything looks sharper. Not perfect, but sharper in the ways that matter most in November and December. The biggest wild card, of course, remains the quarterback situation. Aaron Rodgers' hand injury introduces a layer of uncertainty that hangs over the offense like a shadow. Whether he returns quickly or needs time, the Steelers must find a way to keep the offense stable, efficient, and mistake-free. Mason Rudolph has already shown he can execute the structure when needed, but the organization knows Rodgers' veteran presence, field vision, and experience will be critical for the late-season gauntlet. Still,